Hello all, welcome to another video of mine, Industrial Internet of Things. So in the previous videos we have learned about sensor definition, the definition of transducers, characteristics of sensors, and the examples of sensors and the types of sensors. So now we are going to learn about the classification of sensors. Previously we have learned about the sensor characteristics, which is nothing but the static and the dynamic characteristics like accuracy, precision, resolution. So these were the characteristics of sensors. Now we are going to learn about the sensor classification. So we have two types of sensors mainly, active and passive sensors, analog and digital sensors. So the first type is passive sensor. It cannot independently sense the input. So that's why we say it as a passive sensor. The main example is accelerometer. Accelerometer is the one which we find in the two-wheeler to know the speed of the sensor. Soil moisture is the one which is usually used in foreign countries to know the moisture of the soil in agricultural lands. So next sensor is a water level sensor and the temperature sensors. So temperature sensors can usually be used in robotics. Water level sensors can also be used in household applications like to determine the water level in the water tanks. So these are the specific applications where we will be using these types of passive sensors. So the next one is the active sensor. It can independently sense the input. That is why we say it as active sensors. The first example is a radar sensor, sound sensor, and the laser altimeter sensors. So radar sensor to determine the light, sound sensor to determine the sound, and laser altimeter sensor to determine the laser light. So these are the active sensors. Compared to the passive sensors, active sensors would be quite costly. Next one is the analog sensor. The response or output of the sensor is continuous function of its input parameter. So, whenever you find, we say it as analog watch and the digital watch, right? Whenever we say we find the needle movement, whenever it is not that much accurate, we say it as analog data. So, these are like temperature sensors, light sensors, LDR sensor, light sensor, analog pressure sensor, and the analog Hall effect magnetic sensors. So we have magnetic needles, magnetic compass to determine the directions, and pressure meter to determine pressure, analog meter now, uh, and temperature detector for fever detection. So these are like temperature sensors which will be producing the analog data. LDR shows continuous variation in its resistance as a function of intensity of light falling on it. So based on the intensity of light, the light radiations will be indicated, will be measured, and the output will be displayed using analog needles, analog measurements. Next one is the digital sensors, which are commonly used nowadays. They will be producing the binary data either in the form of zeros and ones and in the form of bits. The example is computer calculators, watches. We have pressure meter. Nowadays, we have pressure meters, temperature meters. Responses in binary nature. Binary in nature in the sense either in the form of zeros and ones. These sensors will always be used to design to overcome the disadvantages of analog sensors. Analog is the previous one, and the digital sensor is the latest one. Along with the analog sensor, it also comprises of extra electronics for bit conversion. The main example is the passive infrared sensor, PIR sensor, and the digital temperature sensor. Digital temperature sensor, we can find it in hospitals nowadays. And passive infrared sensor is the door open, door close operation. When it is one, then the door gets opened on detecting the presence of the human beings. When nobody is there, then it means the output signal is zero and the door gets closed. So that is called as passive infrared sensor. Nowadays we have in phones we have touch sensor, we have light sensor, So these are the sensors which we have in location sensor. These are the sensors which we use in phone nowadays. I hope you would have learned from the video. See you in the next video. Until then, it's bye from Radhika.